She woke up before the sun, as she did every day. The small room was quiet except for the hum of an old fan. The walls were plain, the floor cold, and the window looked out onto a narrow street where life moved slowly in the early hours. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, gathering herself, then stood up and began another long day. Her uniform hung neatly on a chair, clean, simple, and worn from many washes. She put it on carefully, smoothing the fabric as if it mattered more than it did. To her, it did matter. It was proof that she was working, trying, and not giving up. Before leaving, she paused at a small corner of the room where an old keyboard sat covered with a cloth. She did not touch it. She rarely had time anymore. Still, her eyes rested on it for a second longer than usual. Then she turned and walked out. The restaurant was already busy when she arrived. It was one of those places where everything looked expensive, even the silence. Tall windows, soft lights, polished floors, and tables set with perfect precision. The kind of place where people spoke confidently and expected to be obeyed without asking twice. She tied her apron, took a deep breath, and stepped into her role. From the moment she entered the dining area, she became almost invisible. Not truly unseen, but unnoticed in a way that stripped away her presence. Guests talked over her, waved her away, or snapped their fingers to get her attention. She moved quickly, quietly, always apologizing even when she had done nothing wrong. Her face stayed calm, though her body often felt tired before the day had even begun. Many of the guests came from a world she could not imagine. Their clothes were sharp, their voices confident, their laughter loud and careless. They talked about investments, trips, deals, and people she had never heard of. Sometimes they glanced at her shoes or her hands, as if measuring her worth without meaning to hide it. Sometimes they did not bother hiding it at all. She had learned not to react. Early on, she realized that showing hurt only invited more of it. So she kept her head down and her movements steady. She listened more than she spoke. She memorized orders perfectly and returned with plates balanced carefully in her hands. Mistakes were not forgiven easily here, especially from someone like her. During short breaks, she stood near the back, sipping water and stretching her sore fingers. The restaurant had a piano near the wall, large and elegant, mostly there for decoration. Guests sometimes took photos beside it, but no one played it. She passed it many times a day. Each time, her heart pulled slightly, like a memory tapping gently from the inside. She had grown up with music. It was the one thing that had ever made her feel understood. As a child, she learned to play on an old piano that barely stayed in tune. Her fingers were small, but her determination was strong. She practiced whenever she could, often late at night, playing softly so she would not disturb anyone. Music became her language, the place where she could say things she never spoke out loud. Life, however, had not allowed her to follow that path. Responsibilities came early. Bills came faster. Dreams were slowly pushed aside, not because she stopped loving them, but because survival asked for more urgent attention. The piano became something she carried inside instead of something she touched. Back in the dining room, the afternoon crowd began to change. Fewer business meetings, more social gatherings. Laughter grew louder, voices sharper. A group of well-dressed guests sat near the center, already drawing attention. They spoke boldly, as if the space belonged to them. She was assigned to their table. From the start, their tone was dismissive. They interrupted her while she spoke, corrected her pronunciation, laughed among themselves when she asked questions to confirm their order. One of them looked her up and down and smirked, whispering something that made the others chuckle. She pretended not to hear, though every word landed heavily inside her chest. She delivered their drinks carefully, but her hands trembled slightly. The tray felt heavier than usual. She reminded herself to breathe. She reminded herself that this was temporary, that she had endured worse. Still, the air around the table felt tense, as if waiting for something to go wrong. As she reached to place a glass on the table, someone moved suddenly. The glass tipped, and liquid spilled across the tablecloth. The sound was small, but the reaction was loud. Chairs scraped, Voices rose. Laughter burst out, sharp and cruel. She froze for a moment, then quickly grabbed napkins, apologizing again and again. Her voice stayed soft, but her face burned. One of the guests made a joke about her clumsiness. Another suggested she should practice carrying drinks before working in such a place. Their words cut deeper than they knew. Other diners watched, some with curiosity, some with discomfort, but no one intervened. The manager approached, offered polite apologies to the guests, and glanced at her with clear disappointment. She nodded silently, finished cleaning the mess, and stepped away. In the hallway near the kitchen, she paused. Her hands shook now. Her chest felt tight. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes for a brief moment. She did not cry. She had learned how to hold tears back until they disappeared. Still, something inside her felt bruised. She thought about leaving, just walking out and never coming back. The thought lasted only a few seconds. Rent, food, responsibilities all lined up in her mind like guards blocking the exit. She straightened her uniform, wiped her hands, and returned to work. As the evening approached, the lights dimmed slightly, and the atmosphere grew more formal. The piano sat quietly in its corner, reflecting the warm glow of the chandeliers. She passed it again, her reflection briefly visible on its polished surface. For a moment, she imagined sitting there, letting her fingers speak instead of her silence. She shook the thought away and continued serving tables, unaware that this day, which had begun like any other, was quietly preparing to change everything. Part of her still believed she would always remain unseen. Another part, small but stubborn, refused to disappear. That part waited patiently, holding on to something the world had not yet taken from her. The night grew busier as the hours passed. The earlier tension had not faded. It had only settled deeper into the air. The group at the center table remained loud and demanding, calling her over again and again for small things they could easily handle themselves. Each request came with a tone that reminded her of her place, at least in their eyes. She moved between tables with practiced care. Her steps were quick, her posture straight, her expression controlled. Inside, however, her thoughts kept circling back to the laughter from earlier, the way it echoed in her head even after the sound itself had disappeared. She wondered how people could speak so freely without realizing the weight of their words. Some guests treated her kindly. A quiet nod, a soft thank you, a small smile. Those moments helped more than they knew. Still, kindness was often quiet, while cruelty made sure it was heard. The balance always felt unfair. As she cleared plates near the kitchen, another waitress whispered something about the elite group. The tone was half joking, half warning. Everyone knew those guests. They came often, spent a lot, and expected to be treated like royalty. Complaints from them could cost someone their job. She nodded, already aware, already careful. The manager walked past, checking tables, adjusting settings, making sure everything looked perfect. When he glanced at her, his eyes paused for a moment longer than usual, not with anger, but with concern mixed with pressure. She understood that look. It meant be careful. It meant no more mistakes. She promised herself she would be invisible for the rest of the night. No spills, no wrong orders, no reason for attention. She focused harder than ever, double-checking everything before she moved. Her body felt tight like a string pulled too far. The elite group ordered again, this time drinks that required extra preparation. She wrote everything down neatly and repeated the order back to them. One of them laughed and said she did not need to try so hard. Another said something about how nervous she looked. Their words were wrapped in smiles, but the meaning was clear. She returned with the drinks, setting each one down slowly. For a moment, it seemed like the tension might pass without another incident. Then one of them leaned back in his chair and casually asked her if she had ever done anything more interesting than carrying plates. The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. Honesty felt dangerous. Silence felt safer. She chose the safest path and shook her head gently, saying she was just working. They laughed again. Someone said it showed. Someone else suggested that some people were simply meant to serve. The words were not shouted, but they landed heavily. Her chest tightened, and she felt heat rise to her face. She kept her eyes down, pretending to check the table. Nearby, the piano stood quietly, its surface reflecting the lights above. One of the guests glanced toward it and made a joking comment about talent and class. He said people like them understood art, while others only cleaned up after it. The group laughed louder this time. She felt something shift inside her. Not anger exactly, but a deep, tired sadness mixed with frustration. It was the feeling of being misunderstood, reduced to a single role, as if her life began and ended with an apron. She finished serving their table and stepped away, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. In the kitchen area, the noise was louder, the pace faster. Plates clattered, voices overlapped, orders were called out. No one noticed the tears forming in her eyes because no one was looking. She leaned against the counter for a moment, breathing slowly. She told herself not to cry. Crying would make it worse. Crying would make her weak in their eyes. She wiped her face quickly and returned to the floor. As the evening continued, more guests arrived. The restaurant filled with sound and movement. She stayed busy, barely stopping to think. Work became her shield. Each task completed was proof that she could endure. The elite group, however, seemed determined to keep her attention. They asked for changes, sent dishes back for small reasons, and made comments that hovered just on the edge of what could be called harmless. Each time, she responded politely, professionally, even as her energy drained. At one point, she overheard one of them talking about success, about how hard work alone was not enough, about how some people simply lacked the spark to rise higher. She knew the words were not meant directly for her, but they felt aimed all the same. She wondered what they would say if they knew about the hours she spent practicing music as a child, the way her fingers once moved freely across keys. She wondered if they would still think she lacked something, or if they would find another reason to dismiss her. The thought stayed with her as she passed the piano again. Her reflection looked different now. Tired, yes, but also focused, like someone standing at the edge of a decision. She did not know what that decision was yet, only that something inside her refused to stay quiet. A small break came when another staff member covered her section briefly. She stepped aside, took a sip of water, and tried to calm her racing thoughts. Her heart was beating faster than it should have been. She pressed her fingers together, feeling the familiar shape of calluses formed not only from carrying trays, but from years of playing. When she returned to the dining area, the elite group was still there. One of them waved her over with exaggerated motion. This time, the tone was playful but sharp. He asked if she had ever tried sitting at the piano instead of walking around all night. The table burst into laughter. A few nearby guests looked over, curious. The comment was meant as a joke, but it carried an edge. It suggested that the piano was far beyond her place. She stood there, holding a tray, unsure how to respond. Her heart pounded. Every instinct told her to apologize and walk away. That was what she always did. That was what was expected. But something about the way they laughed, about the way they looked at her, made her pause. She looked at the piano, then back at them. For the first time that night, she met their eyes. She did not speak. Not yet. But in that silence, something important began to form. A choice she had not planned. A moment that would soon demand courage she did not know she still had. The music inside her, quiet for so long, stirred again, waiting for its chance to be heard. She stood there longer than she meant to. The tray felt heavy in her hands, but her feet would not move. The laughter from the table slowly faded into awkward silence. A few of the guests noticed her pause and exchanged looks. The question about the piano still hung in the air, light on the surface, sharp underneath. She lowered the tray onto a nearby stand and straightened her back. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear alone, but from something else she had not felt in a long time. Felt like standing on the edge of a memory. She took a breath, slow and careful, and spoke in a calm voice that surprised even her. She said she knew how to play. The words sounded small, but they landed hard. For a second, no one reacted. Then someone laughed, not loudly, but with disbelief. Another leaned forward and asked if she was serious. She nodded once. Her hands trembled, so she clasped them together. The table buzzed with comments. Some amused, some doubtful, some openly mocking. One of them said anyone could say that. Another asked where she learned, as if the answer mattered less than the chance to question her. The manager noticed the attention gathering and walked over. His face held concern and caution. He asked what was going on. One of the guests explained, still smiling, that she had claimed she could play the piano. The manager looked at her, surprised. He asked if that was true. She nodded again. She felt suddenly exposed, as if a private part of her life had been placed under bright lights without warning. Still, she did not look away. He hesitated. The piano was not meant for staff. It was there for atmosphere, not performance. Letting a waitress sit at it during business hours felt risky. The guests waited, clearly enjoying the moment. She spoke again, quietly. She said she would only play one piece. She said she would stop if asked. She said she understood if the answer was no. Something in her voice shifted the room. It was not confidence exactly, but sincerity. The manager studied her face, then glanced around at the guests watching closely. After a long pause, he agreed with one condition. She would play briefly and then return to work. A small ripple of excitement moved through the dining room. Chairs turned. Conversations slowed. Some guests looked annoyed, others curious. The elite group leaned back, arms crossed, ready to be entertained or proven right. She walked toward the piano on unsteady legs. Each step felt unreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. The polished surface reflected her apron and tired face. She pulled the bench out and sat down carefully. Her hands hovered above the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was quiet enough that she could hear her own breathing. Doubt rushed in fast. She thought about the years she had not played, the time lost, the practice she no longer had. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were soft, almost unsure. She closed her eyes, blocking out the room, the people, the pressure. She imagined the small room from her childhood, the worn piano, the way music once made her feel safe. The melody began to flow, slowly at first, then with more confidence. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Each note carried pieces of her story. Long nights, quiet hopes, the weight of responsibility, and the stubborn belief that something beautiful could still exist. The room changed as the music grew stronger. Forks paused mid-air. Voices faded. Even the elite table fell silent. What began as a challenge turned into something unexpected. The sound filled the space, warm and deep, touching corners the expensive decor never could. She played without looking up. She let the music speak for her, saying everything she had never said out loud. The embarrassment, the patience, the strength it took to keep showing up. The sadness of letting go of dreams, and the hope that they might not be gone forever. Some guests leaned forward. Others sat still, eyes fixed on her hands. A woman near the window wiped her eyes without realizing it. A man who had been talking loudly earlier stared at the floor, lost in thought. The elite group looked different now. The smiles were gone. One of them shifted uncomfortably. Another rested his elbows on the table, listening closely. The one who had laughed the loudest earlier stared at her with narrowed eyes, as if trying to understand how he had been so wrong. She moved into the final part of the piece, letting the notes rise and fall like breath. Her hands no longer shook. They moved with purpose, guided by something deeper than practice. The music felt honest, unpolished in places, but real. When the last note faded, the silence returned. It was heavier than before, full and complete. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder. Others joined in, the sound spreading across the room. Applause filled the restaurant. Not polite applause, but genuine. The kind that comes from being surprised in the best way. She opened her eyes and looked up for the first time. Faces stared back at her. Changed. She stood slowly, unsure what to do next. The manager approached, his expression different now. Softer. He thanked her quietly and nodded toward her section. She returned to her duties, her legs still weak, her heart racing. As she passed the elite table, one of them stopped her. He cleared his throat and said the performance was impressive. Another added that they had not expected it. The words were not an apology, but they were not a joke either. She nodded politely and moved on. She did not wait for approval. Something inside her had already shifted. The music had done what words never could. The rest of the night felt different. Guests spoke to her with more care. Some asked about the piece she played. Others simply smiled. She answered briefly, returning to work, grounded and calm. Near closing time, she passed the piano once more. It no longer felt distant. It felt familiar again, like an old friend she had finally spoken to. She did not know what would happen next. She only knew that for a few minutes, she had been seen, not as a waitress, but as herself. And that knowledge stayed with her as the lights dimmed and the night came to an end. The restaurant did not return to normal after that night. Even though the tables were cleaned and the lights were dimmed, something lingered in the air. It was not excitement alone, and not shock either. It was the quiet feeling that comes when people realize they have witnessed something real. The next day, she arrived for her shift as usual. Same uniform, same routine, same careful steps. But the looks she received were different. A few coworkers smiled at her in a way they never had before. Some asked if she was nervous the night before. Others said they had felt chills listening to her play. She thanked them politely, unsure how to respond. Praise felt unfamiliar, almost heavy. The manager called her aside before the doors opened. His tone was calm, thoughtful. He said guests had asked about her. More than one. They wanted to know who she was, how long she had played, if she would ever play again. He said the restaurant had received messages praising the unexpected performance. She listened quietly, hands folded, eyes down. She did not know what any of this meant. She expected a warning, maybe a reminder that her job came first. Instead, the manager surprised her. He said the piano had always been underused. He said the restaurant had been considering live music on certain nights. Then he paused and asked if she would be interested. Her heart skipped. She did not answer right away. Interest was easy. Fear was stronger. She said she was not sure. She said she had not played in a long time. He nodded, understanding, and said there was no pressure. He only wanted her to think about it. The rest of the shift passed slowly. Guests who recognized her from the night before watched her closely. Some with curiosity, some with admiration. A few asked gentle questions. She answered briefly, careful not to draw attention. She did not want to be treated like a story or a surprise. Later in the evening, the same elite group returned. Their entrance was quieter this time. They chose the same table, but their energy had changed. When she approached, there were no jokes. No laughter aimed at her. Orders were placed politely. As she served them, one of them cleared his throat and said he had not slept well after the previous night. He said the music had stayed with him. Another said he had not expected to feel anything at all, yet he had. The words were awkward, not fully formed, but sincere enough. She listened without interrupting. She did not smile, nor did she hold onto the moment. She thanked them and moved on. She did not need their approval now. The music had already done its work. In the days that followed, she practiced quietly at home. Her fingers were stiff at first. Some notes sounded wrong. Some passages felt distant. Still, she kept going. Each evening, after long shifts, she returned to the old keyboard in her room. She played softly, letting muscle memory wake up slowly. The sound was not perfect, but it was honest. She played for herself, not for applause, not for revenge, not to prove anything. Music once again became a place where she could breathe. The restaurant announced a small change. On certain nights, live piano music would be featured. No posters, no grand promises, just a line added to the reservation page. The staff whispered about it. Guests grew curious. The first night came sooner than she expected. She wore the same uniform, but her apron felt heavier. She served tables as usual until the manager nodded toward the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked over. This time the room felt different. People knew what to expect. They wanted to listen. She sat down and began to play. The music filled the space again. Calmer this time, more confident. Conversations softened instead of stopping completely. The piano blended into the room, becoming part of it rather than a surprise. She played several pieces that night. Between sets, she returned to serving tables. It was tiring, but satisfying in a way she had never known. She felt balanced, as if two parts of her life were finally speaking to each other. Guests stayed longer than usual. Some asked to book tables near the piano. Tips increased. The mood shifted. The restaurant felt warmer, more human. The elite group attended again. They listened without comment, without judgment. One of them left a generous tip and a note that simply said thank you. She folded the note and placed it in her pocket. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that people could change, even if slowly. At home, she slept better. Her dreams were filled with sound instead of worry. She woke up with tired muscles and a quiet sense of purpose. Still, doubt returned in small moments. She wondered how long this balance could last. She wondered if the attention would fade. She wondered if she deserved any of it. One evening, after closing, the manager sat with her near the piano. He spoke honestly. He said talent often hides in unexpected places. He said people were too quick to decide who belonged where. He asked if she had ever thought about teaching or performing elsewhere. She shook her head. The idea felt too large, too uncertain. He did not push. He simply said doors had a way of opening when people least expected it. As weeks passed, the restaurant gained a reputation. Not just for fine food, but for atmosphere. Reviews mentioned the music. Guests returned. She remained grounded. She still cleaned tables, carried trays, apologized when needed. But something had changed inside her. She no longer felt invisible. One night, as she finished her final piece, she looked out at the room. People were listening, truly listening. She realized the piano had not given her a new life. It had reminded her of the one she had nearly forgotten. When the last note faded, there was applause again. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady and warm. She stood, bowed her head slightly, and returned to work. The journey was not over. She knew that. But for the first time in years, she felt ready for whatever came next. The weeks continued to pass, and life settled into a new rhythm. It was not sudden fame or a dramatic change, but something quieter and deeper. She still woke up early, still walked the same streets, still wore the same uniform. Yet the weight she carried inside felt lighter. The restaurant became a place she no longer feared. Felt familiar now, almost safe. Guests greeted her by sight, some by memory of the music. They did not all know her story, and she did not feel the need to explain it. She liked that the piano spoke for her when words fell short. One evening, a couple sat near the piano, holding hands. They listened closely as she played, their faces calm and thoughtful. When she finished, the woman quietly thanked her and said the music reminded her of home. The words stayed with her long after the night ended. Moments like that began to matter more than applause. She realized that touching even one person deeply was enough. She no longer needed to prove anything to those who once laughed. The elite group stopped coming as often. When they did, they kept to themselves. There were no more jokes, no sideways looks. If regret existed, it stayed unspoken. She did not wait for apologies. She had moved beyond that. One afternoon, she received a message from the manager asking her to come in early. The tone was gentle but serious. She felt a familiar knot form in her stomach as she walked into the restaurant before opening hours. He sat with her at a quiet table. He said the restaurant had been contacted by someone who attended one of the music nights. The person worked with a small cultural center nearby. They were looking for local performers, people with real stories, not polished perfection. He said her name had come up more than once. Her first reaction was disbelief. She laughed softly and said there must be a mistake. He shook his head and slid a small card across the table. It had an address and a number written on it. She took the card but did not promise anything. Fear rose again, familiar and sharp. Performing outside the restaurant felt different. Bigger. Riskier. The manager told her she could take her time. No one was rushing her. That night, at home, she sat in front of the keyboard for a long time without playing. She thought about her younger self, practicing quietly, dreaming without knowing how hard life could be. She thought about all the reasons she had stopped believing. Then she began to play. The music came slowly, unsure at first, then clearer. It reminded her that she had already stepped into fear and survived. The restaurant piano had not broken her. It had healed something. Days later, she visited the cultural center. The building was modest, warm, and filled with sound. People of different ages practiced instruments, painted, laughed, and shared stories. No one looked down on her. No one asked where she belonged. She played a short piece there, her hands steady, her heart open. When she finished, the room was quiet. Someone smiled and said they would like her to play again, maybe even teach someday. She walked home that evening feeling something she had not felt in years. Possibility. She did not quit her job right away. She continued working at the restaurant, balancing both worlds carefully. Music nights continued, and guests kept returning. The piano remained a bridge between who she was and who she was becoming. One night, after finishing her last piece, she looked around the room. The lights were soft. People listened. She realized she was no longer playing to be seen. She was playing because she had something to give. After closing, she sat alone at the piano for a moment. She pressed a single key and listened as the sound faded. It reminded her of the first night, the laughter, the doubt, the silence before the music began. She understood then that the ridicule had never been about her. It had been about ignorance, about people mistaking position for value. Over time, her schedule changed. She reduced her shifts at the restaurant and spent more hours at the cultural center. She taught beginners, her patience shaped by years of quiet endurance. She performed in small gatherings, never chasing spotlight, only connection. The restaurant held a final music night for her. Not as a farewell but as a thank you. The staff gathered, guests filled the room, and the piano waited. She played one last piece there, something simple and honest. When she finished, the applause felt different, felt like closure. She stepped away from the piano and into a future that still held uncertainty, but no longer fear. She had learned that talent does not disappear when ignored. It waits, and when given even a small chance, it can change everything. As she walked out of the restaurant that night, the city lights reflected softly on the pavement. She took a deep breath and kept walking forward, carrying music with her. Not as a secret anymore, but as a part of who she was. The world had not changed overnight, but she had, and that made all the difference.